Hey everybody, welcome to Moscow Report and Undefined Videos. We're going to rewind back through the history of the Cold War and talk about what happened to limit the nuclear weapons and warheads around the world, starting from 1945, the very first time a nuclear bomb was tested during the Trinity nuclear test and its first use in Japan on Hiroshima and Nagasaki, until the present day. And believe it or not, during the Cold War between Soviet Union and the United States, it got up to almost 60,000 nuclear warheads in each country's arsenal. These nuclear warheads are on what's known as a triad. The triad is a bomber that's able to carry either a cruise missile or a nuclear bomb. The other part of the triad is a nuclear ballistic missile submarine. Both United States, Soviet Union, now Russia, and a few other countries actually have these types of submarines which are able to launch ballistic missiles from under the water that go into space and then can hit a target. And the third triad component is the ground-based, silo-based, or ground-based mobile nuclear missile systems, such as the Minutemen or the SS-36, known as the Satan, in the Russian arsenal. So this is the nuclear triad, but believe it or not, the warheads were going a little bit out of hand because each country during the Cold War was building more and more of them because they all wanted to ensure that they had more because more is better, and basically it was a case of one-upmanship. It's like, I've got this, now I've got that, I've got an iPhone 7, now I've got an iPhone 8, now I've got a Samsung 9, and so it went to the point of being ridiculous because both countries basically ended up with a huge stockpile of nuclear weapons that they could blow up the world 10 times over, and literally blow up the world 10 times over with that many warheads. So what happened is there was the nuclear crisis that almost led to a world war, known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban crisis was really a Soviet fear and response to the fact that the United States was able to use its NATO ally countries to base nuclear missiles right on the doorstep of Soviet Union and Turkey. So what the Russians did is they secretly smuggled nuclear missiles to Cuba. Of course, the United States, with their U-2 overflights, were able to fly over Cuba and saw that the Russians, the Soviets, were setting up locations to launch nuclear missiles that could reach all the way to Seattle. Now, remember, back in the day of 1962, those missiles couldn't go very far, but by putting them right next door to an enemy's country, you could get to almost anywhere. So there was an embargo, there was a halt of all transports to Cuba. It got pretty close to a very dangerous situation. The world was literally hanging in the balance, but cooler heads prevailed, and through back channels, both Soviet Union and the United States backed off, and everything seemed to be going the right way. Communism and capitalism really realized at that point, we are screwed if we do anything else that is going to lead to a third world war with nuclear weapons. But how do you ensure that you don't blow each other up? So what happened is the United States and Soviet Union signed the SALT treaties. These are known as the Strategic Arms Limitation Talks. Now, the first one was signed in May 26 of 1972, which froze the number of ballistic missile launchers at existing levels. So what this meant is that, no, you cannot build any more nuclear missile bases. And the other thing that it also put in place is an anti-ballistic missile treaty. See, by 1962, there was no way to shoot down a missile that was flying towards your country, but 10 years later, by 1972, the Soviets and the United States developed ways to actually shoot down a ballistic missile while it was flying down many times the speed of sound from space towards a target on the ground. This meant that one country could be tempted to use its nuclear weapons against the other one because there was a chance they would not get blown out by the response. Basically, what the ABM treaty did is it said, okay, you guys have figured out how you can shoot down ballistic missiles coming at you, but you can only protect one area of your country. And so by that agreement, Russia, Soviet Union decided to put the anti-ballistic missile defense around Moscow, and the United States put it around their base in Grand Forks in North Dakota to protect their Minuteman nuclear missile base there. And this basically froze the development of anti-ballistic missile defense as well. All seemed well until 1979, when United States and Soviet Union put their heads together one more time, going, hey, we have way too many nuclear weapons still, and it's getting pretty crazy. So the SALT II Treaty was signed in June 18th, 1979, at which point Jimmy Carter and Leonid Brezhnev basically agreed that they're going to limit the development of their heavy strategic missile launchers, and they're going to limit the other types of delivery vehicles for their nuclear warheads, as well as put a limit on MIRV missiles. Now, MIRVs are multiple reentry vehicles, which basically means you launch one rocket into space that carries 10 warheads, and each one of those warheads can come down in a different location on an enemy target and cause all kinds of havoc, making it much more difficult to take out and to protect yourself. The other thing about a MIRV missile is that when one goes up, it carries a heck of a lot more warheads. So that limitation in SALT II Treaty also was very useful, because it limited how many MIRVs there are. Because if your limitations are you can only have 100 rockets, but if your rockets each carry 10 warheads, you're looking at a lot more nuclear warheads in each one's arsenal. So SALT II was really focused on limiting those MIRVs, making sure that they can't be used as an excuse around the limitations of the treaties as well. The real reduction in the nuclear warheads really came after the START I Treaty in the 90s. And the START treaties basically focused on eliminating the weapons from each country's arsenal, such as bombers, submarines, and heavy ballistic missiles. This was really in response to the fact that, one, Soviet Union was falling apart and wanted not to manage as much gear and having so much hardware all over the place. There was no money for it. At the same time, the United States realized that with Soviet Union basically falling apart, the communism failing, that they had an opportunity here to also reduce their nuclear weapons, because the main enemy was gone, and we didn't really need to blow up the world over. So the total number and reductions really started happening in the 90s with the START I Treaty, which was followed on by the START II Treaty later on, and led to a further reduction of nuclear weapon arsenals for both countries. Now, this actually is where it gets very tricky and finicky. And the reason it gets tricky and finicky is you have to go back to 1972 and that ABM defense agreement between Soviet Union and the United States. With 9/11 occurring, the Bush government decided that there is a chance that an enemy country such as Iran or North Korea could launch a ballistic missile at the United States. And under that context, the decision was made to have the United States unilaterally withdraw from the ABM Defense Treaty, because the United States has been working on a defense system to protect the United States from all sides from ballistic missiles. Now, the United States already had the Patriot system, which could shoot down cruise missiles or aircraft, but working under a number of different aspects of technologies, the United States made a few leaps and bounds, such as the SM-3 surface-to-air missile, which could shoot down satellites. And this was actually tested by taking out one of the satellites in orbit. So this meant that the United States was now able to produce, design, it had the technology and the ability to protect itself with advanced radars and ballistic missile defense systems. Of course, this pissed off Russia to no extent. The reason it did is because it meant that the Russian Federation's nuclear weapons all of a sudden were in a position where it would be vulnerable and would not be able to penetrate the United States defenses should a nuclear war start. See, the United States has been developing and put in place missile defense systems. Russia has been kind of chilling out because they were broke for about 25 years and really were not developing anything of the sort, because it costs a lot more money to develop a missile defense system than to just develop missiles. Now, of course, it's quantity and quality, and the Russian Federation could throw a whole bunch of nuclear missiles towards the United States, but the United States made enough breakthroughs and has put up enough defense systems around itself to really be assured that a rogue nation such as Iran or North Korea would not be able to penetrate their missile defense shield. When it comes to a mass launch of hundreds of missiles from the Russian Federation, that is a whole different story. But because the United States has withdrawn from the ABM treaty, Vladimir Putin and the Russians were quite upset and very pissed off, and this led to the development of the Russian missiles and defense systems that were deployed and shown off by Vladimir Putin this year in 2018 on March 1st. So there we have it. In about 10 minutes, we are now at the point of 2018 and what happens next. I guess my question to those who are watching this video is, what do you think is going to happen? Where is Vladimir Putin's going to go? What is going to happen with Donald Trump and the current situation? Let me know in the comments. What is going to be the future of nuclear weapons, the agreements, the missile defense systems, and the treaties? And what is your opinion on North Korea and Iran? Are they still a credible threat? So let me know in the comments. Subscribe and like this video. All those are appreciated in the modern day and age of YouTube.